You kidnapped the wrong woman, and now she is the only person who can save your empire." The words were calm, almost impossible to believe, but they stopped Alexander Whitmore in the middle of the quiet room. For the first time in years, the man who had built one of New York's most powerful families felt something he rarely experienced: uncertainty. The woman standing across from him was not Victoria Carter. The woman he expected to find was someone with secrets tied to his enemies. Someone who understood the dangerous world he lived in. Instead, he had brought home Evelyn Carter, a woman whose name barely appeared in any record, a woman most people would have overlooked without a second thought. She wore a simple navy coat, her hands resting calmly in front of her, and there was something about her silence that bothered him more than fear ever could. Alexander Whitmore had spent his entire life learning how to read people. He could recognize hesitation, dishonesty, and hidden intentions with a single glance. But Evelyn was different. She was not trying to impress him. She was not trying to escape his attention. She was simply watching. And that was what made her impossible to understand. The mansion around them was built to represent power. Marble floors reflected the warm glow of expensive chandeliers. The walls displayed decades of family history, filled with portraits of men who believed control was the only way to survive. Yet standing in the middle of that world was a woman who had spent most of her life being ignored. Evelyn Carter had learned something powerful about being invisible. People revealed the most when they believed no one was paying attention. For 3 years, she had worked quietly in wealthy homes, cleaning rooms, organizing schedules, and hearing conversations that others thought would disappear into the background. She remembered names. She remembered details. She remembered patterns. Not because she wanted power, but because observation had always been her way of protecting herself. Alexander stepped closer, studying her carefully. "You expect me to believe you are not Victoria?" he asked. Evelyn looked directly at him. Most people avoided his eyes. Most people lowered their voices around him. But she did neither. "I expect you to notice the difference," she replied. The room became still. Alexander had spent years surrounded by people who feared him or wanted something from him. Evelyn was the first person in a long time who seemed to want neither. She only wanted to survive. But survival was not the only thing she carried. Behind her quiet expression was knowledge she had never shared, a truth about her twin sister that could change everything Alexander thought he knew. He believed he had captured a mistake. He believed Evelyn was simply a problem created by bad information. But he was about to discover that the woman everyone ignored was the one person who had been paying attention all along. And inside the walls of his empire, where loyalty was questioned and trust was rare, the woman he thought was powerless was about to become the greatest mystery he had ever faced. For most people, being invisible was a weakness. But for Evelyn Carter, invisibility had always been her greatest advantage. Long before she found herself standing inside Alexander Whitmore's private estate, surrounded by people who measured worth by money, influence, and reputation, she had learned how to disappear in plain sight. She remembered the way wealthy families spoke when they believed no one was listening. She noticed the small changes in routines, the nervous glances between strangers, and the secrets hidden behind polite conversations. Nobody ever thought to watch the woman who cleaned the room. Nobody ever thought to question the person who quietly placed coffee on the table every morning. And that was exactly why Evelyn knew things most people never discovered. Now, sitting in a quiet guest room inside the Whitmore mansion, she stared through the tall windows at the city lights outside. The room was larger than the entire apartment she had once shared with her grandmother. The furniture was elegant. The walls were decorated with expensive artwork, and every detail reminded her that she had entered a world where she did not belong. But Evelyn had never measured belonging by luxury. She measured it by character. Earlier that evening, Alexander had questioned her again. He wanted answers. He wanted to know why she carried the same last name as Victoria Carter, why she knew details about his family, and why she seemed strangely calm in a situation that would have overwhelmed most people. Evelyn had given him only pieces of the truth, not because she wanted to play games, but because she understood something Alexander did not. In his world, information was valuable, and the wrong person knowing too much could change everything. Alexander Whitmore had spent years building an empire where trust was rare. He surrounded himself with advisors, security teams, and people who followed his instructions without hesitation. Yet none of them had noticed what Evelyn noticed within her first few hours inside the mansion. Something was wrong. The people around Alexander were not as loyal as they appeared. She had seen it in their expressions. She had heard it in the pauses between their words. She had recognized the same patterns she had witnessed in other wealthy households before. A smile could hide uncertainty. A compliment could hide an intention. Silence could reveal more than a confession. When Alexander entered the library that night, he found Evelyn standing near a bookshelf, studying a collection of old family records. He did not look angry. He looked curious. "You have a habit of observing everything," he said. Evelyn turned slowly. "And you have a habit of assuming nobody notices you." For a moment, Alexander said nothing. The response surprised him because it was not disrespectful. It was simply honest. He had expected fear. He had expected excuses. Instead, he found someone who looked at him like a person, not a legend. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Evelyn lowered her eyes for a moment, remembering all the times people had ignored her, underestimated her, and decided what she was capable of without ever asking. "I am not helping you," she answered quietly. "I am trying to make sure the truth does not disappear." Those words stayed with Alexander long after she left the room, because for the first time, he began to wonder if the woman he had underestimated was not a mistake at all. Maybe she was the one person who had seen his world clearly from the beginning. The next morning, Evelyn Carter learned the first rule of Alexander Whitmore's world. Everyone was watching, but almost nobody was seeing the truth. The Whitmore mansion moved with perfect precision. Staff members walked quietly through the marble halls. Security personnel checked every entrance, and every conversation seemed carefully measured. It was a place built on control, where every person had a role and every mistake carried consequences. But Evelyn noticed something others ignored. The people who appeared the most confident were often the ones trying hardest to hide something. As she walked through the dining room carrying a tray of coffee, she watched the men gathered around Alexander. They spoke with respect, but their eyes told a different story. They listened when Alexander talked, yet some of them exchanged quick glances whenever certain names were mentioned. Evelyn had spent years learning the language of human behavior. A pause before answering, a forced smile, a hand reaching for a phone at the wrong moment. Small details that most people dismissed often revealed the biggest secrets. Alexander noticed her attention. He noticed everything about her now. "You are always looking around," he said as she placed the coffee on the table. Evelyn remained calm. People usually reveal more when they think nobody is paying attention. The room became quiet for a moment. A few of the men looked at her with surprise, almost amused that someone they considered unimportant would speak with such confidence. Alexander did not react immediately. He simply studied her. Before Evelyn entered his life, nobody inside his organization spoke to him this way. People either agreed with him or avoided difficult conversations. But Evelyn did neither. She did not challenge him because she wanted influence. She challenged him because she believed facts mattered more than fear. Later that afternoon, Alexander asked her to meet him in his office. The large room was filled with books, family photographs, and years of history. He placed a folder on the desk and looked at her carefully. "You said someone around me is hiding something," he said. "That is a serious accusation." Evelyn looked at the folder but did not touch it. "I did not accuse anyone. I said you should pay attention." Alexander leaned back slightly. "And why should I believe your judgment?" It was the question everyone expected him to ask. Evelyn looked at the man who had built his reputation on being impossible to fool. "You should not believe me because I work for you. You should believe me because I have no reason to protect anyone here." That answer caught him off guard. Evelyn was not asking for trust. She was asking him to think. For the first time, Alexander considered the possibility that the woman he had brought into his home by mistake was not a threat. She was a mirror, someone who could see the weaknesses hidden beneath the power. But before he could ask another question, Evelyn noticed something on the desk. A document placed slightly out of order. A name written where it should not have been. A small detail that seemed meaningless to anyone else. Her expression changed for only a second, but Alexander saw it. "What did you notice?" he asked. Evelyn looked at him quietly. "The person you are looking for is not outside your empire." The words settled heavily between them, because Alexander understood what she meant. The greatest danger was not approaching his world. It was already inside it. Alexander Whitmore had spent years believing that information was something he controlled. Every report that reached his desk had been reviewed. Every decision had been calculated. Every person around him had been carefully chosen. Yet now, inside his own office, the person who understood his world better than anyone was the woman everyone else had ignored. Evelyn Carter stood quietly across from him, her eyes focused on the documents spread across the desk. She was not trying to prove herself. She was not trying to gain his approval. She simply saw something that everyone else had missed. Alexander picked up the document and looked at the section she had noticed. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. It was just another business record, another piece of information among thousands that passed through his hands. But Evelyn had noticed a pattern, a small inconsistency, a detail that did not belong. "How did you see that?" Alexander asked. Evelyn looked toward the window, where the city stretched beneath the afternoon light. "Because people who hide things usually focus on the obvious parts. They make sure everything looks perfect. They forget the small things." Alexander remained silent. Her answer was simple, but it carried a truth he had learned the hard way over many years. The smallest details often revealed the biggest problems. For the first time, Alexander stopped seeing Evelyn as someone connected to Victoria Carter. He began seeing her as someone with her own story, someone who had survived by paying attention. "Tell me about your sister," he said. The question changed the atmosphere immediately. Evelyn had expected suspicion. She had expected pressure. She did not expect genuine curiosity. She looked down for a moment before speaking. Victoria had always been the louder one, the one who walked into a room and made people notice her. Evelyn was different. She listened. She remembered. She understood people before they understood her. Growing up, everyone compared the twins. Victoria was considered fearless. Evelyn was considered quiet. But what people never understood was that quiet did not mean weak. Sometimes the person who says the least is the person who sees the most. Alexander listened as Evelyn explained that her sister had always been searching for answers. She had discovered something dangerous about people close to powerful families, and she believed the truth needed to be protected. "You knew she was hiding something," Alexander said. Evelyn nodded. "I knew she was afraid, but I did not know who she was afraid of." That answer stayed with him. Because Alexander knew fear. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted his position, his influence, and his respect. But Evelyn was describing something different. She was describing someone trying to protect a truth. Later that evening, Alexander walked through the quiet halls of the mansion. For the first time, the woman he had considered an accident no longer seemed like a problem. She seemed like a missing piece of a puzzle he had been trying to solve. Evelyn had entered his world without power, without wealth, and without protection. Yet somehow, she had already changed the way he looked at everything around him. And Alexander Whitmore was beginning to realize the most unexpected truth of all. The person he thought he needed to question might be the only person he could trust. The truth about Victoria Carter was not hidden in one dramatic moment. It was hidden in years of small decisions, quiet conversations, and secrets that only became visible when someone knew where to look. Inside the Whitmore mansion, Evelyn sat across from Alexander in the library, the same room where generations of his family had made decisions that shaped their future. The warm glow from the lamps reflected against the dark wooden shelves, creating an atmosphere that felt less like a place for conversation and more like a place where history was written. Alexander placed a photograph on the table. It showed Victoria standing beside people he recognized, people who had once claimed to support his family. "You knew she was connected to them," he said. Evelyn looked at the picture carefully. "I knew she was searching for something." Alexander studied her expression. "And you never asked why?" Evelyn gave a small, thoughtful smile. Sometimes asking the wrong question makes people hide the right answer. The response reminded him of everything he had underestimated about her. Evelyn did not move through life like someone waiting for permission. She moved like someone who had learned that patience could reveal more than pressure. She explained that after Victoria disappeared from her usual routine, she began leaving small clues behind. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would attract attention. Just enough for someone who knew her well to understand that something was wrong. A note hidden inside an old book. A message about trusting no one too quickly. A reminder that appearances could be misleading. Alexander listened carefully. The more Evelyn spoke, the more he realized that Victoria's actions were not random. She had been preparing for something. "Why did she not come to me?" Alexander asked. Evelyn looked at him for a moment before answering. "Because she did not know if you were part of the problem." Those words changed the room. Alexander had built his entire reputation on being the person who always knew what was happening. But now he faced a possibility he had avoided. Perhaps the greatest threat to his empire was not an outside enemy. Perhaps it was a hidden weakness inside the walls he trusted. Evelyn noticed his silence. She understood that powerful people often struggled with uncertainty because they were used to having answers. "You are not used to people telling you things you do not want to hear," she said softly. Alexander looked at her. "And you are?" Evelyn lowered her gaze. "I spent most of my life being ignored. People do not hide things from someone they think does not matter." The statement carried more weight than she intended. Alexander realized that Evelyn's greatest advantage was not information. It was perspective. She had spent years standing outside powerful circles, seeing everything they missed because they never thought she was important enough to notice. That evening, Alexander reviewed every piece of information connected to Victoria. For the first time, he did not look for confirmation of what he believed. He looked for what he had overlooked. And Evelyn remained beside him, not as a prisoner, not as someone beneath him, but as the one person willing to tell him the truth. Somewhere inside the vast Whitmore estate, a carefully hidden secret was beginning to surface. And Alexander Whitmore was finally starting to understand that the woman who entered his world by mistake might have been the answer to a question he had been too proud to ask. The following morning, the atmosphere inside the Whitmore mansion felt different. Nothing had changed on the surface. The marble floors still reflected the soft morning light. The staff still moved quietly through the halls. The city outside continued moving as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside the walls of Alexander Whitmore's home, something had shifted. People were watching Evelyn Carter now. Not because she demanded attention, but because Alexander had started listening to her. And in a world where influence was everything, that small change was impossible to ignore. Evelyn knew the eyes following her were not filled with kindness. Many people inside the mansion had spent years believing they understood their place. They believed Alexander was surrounded by people who were loyal, capable, and trustworthy. Now, a woman they once considered invisible had caused him to question everything. Alexander gathered several members of his inner circle in the main conference room that afternoon. The long table was covered with documents, reports, and years of carefully organized information. Evelyn stood near the end of the room, aware that every person there was waiting for her to fail. One man smiled slightly. "You expect us to believe a house worker understands our business better than the people who have been here for years?" His words were polite, but the message was clear. He did not see Evelyn as a person with knowledge. He saw her as someone who had stepped outside the role others had assigned to her. Evelyn did not respond immediately. She simply looked around the room. She noticed the hesitation in some faces, the confidence in others, the discomfort from the people who suddenly realized she was paying attention. "I do not expect you to believe me," she said calmly. "I expect you to look at the facts." Alexander watched silently from his seat. In the past, he would have interrupted. He would have controlled the conversation before it became uncertain. But now he waited. He wanted to see what Evelyn would do when the room was against her. She opened the first document and pointed out a series of details that seemed unrelated at first. Dates that did not match. Decisions that changed without explanation. Information that appeared in the wrong hands at the wrong time. None of the details were dramatic by themselves. But together, they created a picture that could not be ignored. The room slowly became quieter. The people who had dismissed her began looking at the papers instead of looking down on her. Alexander noticed something important. Evelyn was not trying to defeat anyone. She was not trying to embarrass them. She was simply following the truth wherever it led. "How long have you known about this?" Alexander asked. Evelyn looked at him. "Long enough to know that rushing would make things worse." That answer surprised him. Most people around Alexander chased quick solutions. Evelyn understood that patience was often more powerful than reaction. After the meeting ended, the room remained silent for several seconds. No one laughed. No one questioned whether she belonged there. The woman who had entered the mansion as an accident had changed the way everyone viewed her. Alexander stayed behind, looking at the documents on the table. For years, he believed strength came from having control over every situation. But Evelyn had shown him something different. Sometimes the strongest person in the room was the one who stayed calm when everyone else was searching for answers. And as the afternoon light faded across the Whitmore estate, Alexander realized his greatest discovery was not a hidden secret within his empire. It was the person who had uncovered it. For the first time in many years, Alexander Whitmore faced a decision where power alone could not provide the answer. The information Evelyn Carter uncovered had changed the way he looked at the people around him. Faces he once trusted now carried questions. Conversations he once ignored now seemed important. The empire he had spent years building was still standing, but the foundation beneath it no longer felt as certain as before. Evelyn noticed the change in him. She noticed the way he listened longer before speaking, the way he studied details instead of accepting the easiest explanation. It was a small transformation, but for someone like Alexander, small changes meant everything. He had built his life around certainty. Evelyn had introduced doubt, and somehow that doubt was becoming clarity. That evening, Alexander found her in the quiet corner of the mansion library. She was organizing old records, returning everything exactly where she found it. "You always do that," he said. Evelyn looked up. "Do what?" "Leave things better than you found them." She paused, surprised by the observation. For a moment, the powerful man standing before her did not look like the person everyone feared. He looked like someone trying to understand something he had ignored for years. "People usually notice what changes," Evelyn replied. "They rarely notice who caused the change." Alexander remained quiet. Her words stayed with him because they described something he understood too well. In his world, people celebrated results but rarely valued the person behind them. Later that night, Alexander called a private meeting with his closest advisors. He did not announce his decision immediately. He simply asked questions. Questions that made the room uncomfortable. Questions that revealed who was willing to answer honestly and who was searching for the safest response. Evelyn watched from a distance as Alexander challenged the very habits that had protected his empire for years. He was not looking for someone to agree with him. He was looking for the truth. After the meeting, one of the advisors approached Evelyn. The same person who had dismissed her only days earlier now looked at her differently. "I misjudged you," he admitted. Evelyn simply nodded. She had heard apologies before. What mattered to her was not the words. It was whether people changed afterward. Alexander found her later near the garden outside the mansion. The evening air was cool, and the city lights reflected across the quiet grounds. "You realize you have made yourself a target inside my world," he said. Evelyn looked at him calmly. "I was already invisible in your world. Being noticed was always going to change something." Alexander studied her carefully. "Most people would ask for something after helping someone like me." Evelyn shook her head. "I did not help you because I wanted something." That answer affected him more than he expected. Alexander was surrounded by people who wanted opportunities, favors, and influence. Evelyn wanted none of those things. She wanted the truth to matter. For the first time, Alexander understood that trust was not created by loyalty alone. It was created by honesty, especially when honesty was difficult to accept. But neither of them knew that the biggest test was still ahead. Because somewhere beyond the walls of the Whitmore mansion, Victoria Carter was closer than anyone realized. And the secret she carried would force Alexander and Evelyn to finally face the truth about why their paths had crossed. The truth about Victoria Carter had been hidden behind silence for longer than Alexander Whitmore realized. For days, he had searched for answers inside his own empire, believing the missing pieces were somewhere within the walls of his organization. But the moment Victoria finally appeared, Alexander understood that the story he knew was incomplete. She arrived at the Whitmore estate quietly, not with the confidence of someone returning home, but with the expression of someone carrying a burden she had held alone for far too long. Evelyn stood across from her, and for the first time in years, the two sisters were in the same room again. They looked almost identical at first glance, but Alexander immediately noticed the difference. Victoria carried the weight of someone who had been running from the truth. Evelyn carried the strength of someone who had been protecting it. The room remained silent as the sisters looked at each other. No dramatic words were needed. They both understood how much had changed. Alexander watched carefully, realizing that the mistake that brought Evelyn into his life had revealed something far greater than he expected. "You knew she would come back," he said to Evelyn. She shook her head. "I hoped she would." Victoria explained everything she had discovered before disappearing. She had found information that connected people close to Alexander to decisions that could damage everything he had built. But she did not know who she could trust. Every person with influence had a reason to protect themselves. So she chose the one person nobody would suspect. Her sister, Evelyn. Why did you involve her? Alexander asked. Victoria looked at Evelyn before answering. Because everyone watches the powerful. Nobody watches the person standing quietly beside them. Those words reminded Alexander of everything he had learned during the past several days. Evelyn had never been invisible because she lacked importance. She had been invisible because people refused to see her, and that had allowed her to understand things others missed. Together, the sisters revealed the full picture. Victoria had not been trying to escape Alexander. She had been trying to find someone who valued truth more than reputation, someone who would listen before judging. Alexander realized the irony of the situation. He had spent years protecting his empire from outsiders, yet the person who helped him see clearly was someone he never would have considered important. Evelyn, the woman he had mistaken for a simple employee, the woman he believed was only connected to Victoria. As the evening continued, Alexander gathered the information they had uncovered. But this time, he did not act out of pride or suspicion. He acted with patience. He understood that every decision he made affected real people, not just his position. Evelyn watched him carefully. She saw the change that others might never notice. The man who once believed control was everything was learning that trust required something more difficult: humility. And as the three of them stood together inside the Whitmore mansion, they all understood one thing. The greatest secret was never about who Victoria was. It was about how much Alexander had changed since the day Evelyn entered his world. The Whitmore mansion had always been a place where people measured importance by position, influence, and the power someone carried into a room. But on that quiet morning, something had changed. The same halls that once made Evelyn Carter feel invisible now felt different. Not because the mansion had changed, but because the people inside it had finally started to see her. Alexander Whitmore stood near the large windows of his office, looking out at the city below. For years, he believed protecting his empire meant keeping everyone at a distance. Trust was limited. Emotions were carefully controlled. Every relationship had a purpose. But Evelyn had challenged everything he thought he understood. She had entered his world without wealth, without status, and without a powerful name behind her. Yet she had done what no advisor, no expert, and no longtime member of his circle could do. She made him question the things he believed were certain. In the days that followed, Alexander made decisions that surprised everyone around him. He did not search for someone to blame. He searched for the truth. He did not reward those who simply agreed with him. He respected those who had the courage to be honest. And for the first time, the people around him understood that his leadership was changing. Evelyn watched from a distance as the mansion slowly transformed. The employees who once avoided conversations with her now greeted her with genuine respect. They no longer saw her as the woman who arrived by mistake. They saw her as someone whose intelligence and courage had earned her place. But Evelyn remained the same. She still noticed small details. She still listened more than she spoke. She still believed that people revealed who they truly were when nobody expected to be noticed. One evening, Alexander found her in the garden where they had spoken before. The city lights reflected across the quiet landscape, creating a peaceful moment far away from the pressure of his world. You know, Alexander said, most people would have used this situation to gain something. Evelyn looked at him. Maybe that is why most people never understand what matters. Alexander smiled slightly. It was a rare expression from a man who had spent so long carrying responsibility alone. You changed the way I see people. Evelyn looked away for a moment. No, I just reminded you to look closer. Those words stayed with him, because Alexander finally understood the lesson hidden behind everything that had happened. Power could make people listen, but it could not make them respect you. Wealth could open doors, but it could not reveal the truth about someone's character. Respect was earned through humility, and sometimes the person with the least power could teach the greatest lesson. Victoria eventually rebuilt her life away from the secrets that had followed her. Evelyn continued helping others who were overlooked, using the same patience and understanding that had always defined her. And Alexander Whitmore, the man who once believed strength came from control, learned that true strength came from knowing when to listen. Years later, people would still remember the unusual story of the woman who entered a powerful world as someone nobody noticed. But they would remember something else even more. They would remember that the person everyone underestimated was the one who revealed the truth, changed an empire, and reminded everyone that dignity does not come from status. It comes from the way a person chooses to treat another human being.